So hi, I am Neal Romanek, and welcome to the session called Battling the Pirates, Practical Strategies for Sports Content Protection. We're going to actually look not just at the content protection, but the core of the content, which is the rights themselves. And I'm going to be talking to Mark Lichtenhein from the Sports Rights Owners Coalition, the chairman of the Sports Rights Owners Coalition. And we're going to be looking at content piracy and what do we do about it. My content piracy journey started when I was a young boy living in Ohio in the Midwest of the United States of America. And we would sneak into the drive-in in the back of the, because it was just open fields and you could just walk in and watch a movie for free at the drive-in. And then I moved on to free cable, asking the guy, could you just hook me up with a free cable, and then it even got worse, later on. My dad, knowing I was a big movie fan, would pirate tapes for me, VHS tapes, and mail them to me. And I know nobody in here has ever had any pirate experiences of their own, but I have, so that's the kind of criminal you're dealing with. But that was all kind of in a sort of pre-internet world, and when the internet came along and allowed us to move content around anywhere at scale, and now at amazing quality, the entire game changed. And we're going to hear a lot about what that's like to actually, from the sports rights owner's point of view. Talking to Mark today. So Mark,
thank you, Neal.
Tell us first about the SROC and what do you do and how did it start?
Sure. So for those of you not familiar with the Sports Rights Owners Coalition, which I suspect is most people, because we're not a consumer-facing organisation. So we actually started 20 years ago. We just celebrated our 20th anniversary. What brought us together at the time, we were like a handful of different sports who recognized that at the beginning of the internet era, when a lot of our traditional business models and approaches to things were being challenged, not least by the newspaper industry that wanted to redefine the definition of news now that they had websites of their own, and they felt that they could have access to all our video and all our data. And we said, look, amongst ourselves, we said that we've really got to kind of come together and get a handle on this and set some guidelines that we can all agree on. Otherwise, we're just going to be picked off individually by this new internet phenomenon. So what started, I think, with maybe 10 or a dozen rights owners who got together in London 20 years ago is now 55 different sports rights owners covering pretty much every sport. And we've become effectively sports trade association, for want of a better word. And we're very focused on the protection and the development of our underlying intellectual property rights, because it's the monetization of those rights which ultimately fund the sports industry. So whether that's media rights, which we'll be talking about today, but it could easily be sponsorship rights. We deal with ambush marketing issues, with secondary ticketing issues, anything which undermines the value of sport. So a lot of what we do, we do take legal action collectively from time to time, but most of what we're doing is in the public policy space, lobbying governments, particularly the European Union, because most of our members are based in Europe, and just to try and firstly stop any stupid, silly policies which might affect the value of our rights, but also to develop those rights further if we can. I think unless you happen to live in France, which is the only country in Europe that has a codified set of rights for sports organisers, something which we in the coalition think is a very good idea, and we've lobbied hard to have that replicated across the whole of Europe, so far without success. But if you imagine the kind of legislation that the IOC demands on any country that hosts the Olympic Games, that's the kind of legislation that France has in situ all the time. And it means it's not just about ticketing and sponsorship. One of the best things about the French legislation, certainly from our point of view, is that if you want to offer bets on a particular sport, a gambling operator, you have to get the permission from that sports organizer to offer bets on their sport, and you have to agree the type of bets that you're going to offer, and you have to pay them 1% of your turnover. Now, obviously, we think that's a wonderful model, but in the UK, that's kind of impossible given the power of the gambling lobby. But nonetheless, we continue to talk about that as a very good model that we think could be replicated across Europe. And actually, Australia has something similar, but examples are few and far between. But obviously, so we deal with a lot of different issues, but digital piracy, I think, has brought the coalition closer together than it's ever been, because every single sport is affected by the theft of its content, and obviously its ability to monetize its rights is greatly diminished if that content is being stolen and resold at a fraction of the price of the market value.
So you're talking about, I mean, it's the sports rights owners. It's not sports revenue owners.
No.
And it is, we talk about piracy is affecting revenue.
Sure.
But there is, I think, as you're saying, this kind of core thing below that is you have the legal right to make money from that content, and that legal right is being affected by piracy. So it's a matter of law, not just a matter of we're losing money.
Absolutely, but I mean, even the concept of media rights, I don't want to get into the legal weeds of it, but I mean, it's only a construct really of the sports industry that these rights exist. I mean, there's nothing in law that says not in English law at least, that says if you put on an event, you own the rights to it and you can sell them and stuff like this. So, and arguably, in terms of gambling, there isn't a right. Anybody can leverage your sport in the UK and offer bets on the data, the intellectual property that you're creating, and keep all the profits and not give you anything. So, whereas we don't allow people to come in with television, with cameras and film things and sell it and make money out of it, because there is an established norm, if not a legal construct, that those rights exist. So a lot of this is, as I say, in the absence of a codified set of legal constructs, it's really just the established practices that make it happen. But I think the important thing about media rights is that when you look at the big leagues, so like we obviously have a lot of football leagues who are members of the Sports Rights Owners Coalition, whether it's the Premier League, La Liga, Bundesliga, UEFA, etc. The money that is generated from the media rights typically is around 80% of the commercial revenue of those big leagues. So everything else makes up the 20%. So hence, as I say, this is why piracy has brought the coalition together in the way it has, because, and we don't know the exact numbers, but it's generally reckoned that around half the legal market is being pirated. So, only 50% of people watching sport are watching it legally. And that means that the illegal market is worth around $30 billion a year. So if you're a pirate, it's fantastic business, really good.
So and I think it's kind of important to drill down on that, because you go, piracy, that sounds like a bummer. But the size and scale of it is kind of still, it's hard for people to get their heads around, I
Absolutely.
think. So you kind of alluded to it, but can you kind of get down a bit
Yeah, I mean, look, so if
more
you go
into the weeds about that?
So it's quite ironic. I mean, I remember 18 years ago, there was a case study done by the OECD into digital piracy when it was obviously in its infancy, which we participated in. And we pointed out the potential dangers of digital piracy and its effect on the rights market, 18 years ago. And sadly, I mean, it's come to pass, and it's a lot worse than we'd even imagined at the time. But I mean, back in the day, piracy was, there was card sharing between people who had set-top boxes, which was relatively harmless. I mean, then there was cloning of cards, which was less harmless. And then when the internet started, kids would, play around with encoding stuff and sharing it with their friends. And then with peer-to-peer networking, it became a bit more accessible. The quality, though, was still pretty rough. But it was only when, bandwidth, as you alluded to, the availability of bandwidth made digital quality, HD quality of this stuff much more real, that we started to see people either starting websites where they would restream, or they'd steal the feed and restream it, usually with advertising, predominantly from the gambling industry, I have to say, to generate income. And then people started creating local networks, the sort of advent of IPTV networks. But, in the last 5 to 10 years, it's become so sophisticated that you have organized crime groups generating a lot of income from digital piracy because, as I said, as pirates, it's a fantastic business model. Compared to drug trafficking or people trafficking, you're probably not going to get shot. It's not that dangerous. If you get caught, the penalties are pretty, they're not very severe compared to drug trafficking. And you can work in total anonymity. I mean, you can be, you can set up a platform even today and register as Mickey Mouse in Disneyland. You pay your fees, nobody says anything, and then when somebody finds out that you're running some pirate network and they try and call Disneyland, and Mickey Mouse isn't available, So it's a really great business model for pirates, which is why we have spent so much time over the past 18 years trying to explain to governments and policymakers around the world that we really need to do something about this, because this is theft. Ultimately, it's theft, and normally if you steal something, there's a penalty, but in digital piracy, there doesn't really seem to be a penalty at the moment.
So then, they're talking about the gambling industry, and now I'm thinking it's kind of, I mean, they probably benefit from piracy, don't they? Because isn't that more people taking an interest in the
absolutely.
Yeah,
and
that seems like a.
And that's
If
why
I was
I
in
say
the gambling industry, I'd be in bed with the pirates.
That's why I say I say 10 years ago, the funding model for the pirate websites was 80% of it was advertising from bookmakers.
Right.
Because that's your natural, those are the natural beneficiaries of people watching the match.
Amazing.
The game.
So I guess we've established the problem. What are you, I mean, we know some of the interventions, we know there's some of the technologies available, but what are you doing and your members doing kind of specifically to try to stop piracy, and kind of what are the first steps? Like if I'm trying to keep hold of my IP, what do I actively need to be doing?
Yeah.
And how effective is that?
Yeah, so there's a number of pieces to this puzzle, obviously. So, I mean, just to break down the pirate ecosystem. I mean, what do pirates need? They need a source. They need a legitimate copy of what they're going to pirate. Okay, so it starts with access to that legitimate source. Now, a lot of time, money has been spent, and there are a lot of vendors around to help with protecting that content, firstly. So if you're selling your rights, you will want to make sure that whoever you're licensing them to has a robust set of DRM measures or encoding measures, whatever it is, that protect that content from pirates. And that's the first step that everybody has to do. But the problem is that you only need, as a pirate, you only need a few sources, a few legitimate sources, to have the resilience you need to run a pirated network. So one copy can be replicated millions, billions of times. You don't need lots of copies. And so you'll see there's a lot of vendors out there who are selling very sophisticated solutions involving fingerprinting the content, watermarking the content, to be able to recognize where it has come from. And in some cases, the set-top boxes, the latest ones, pay TV operators can say, aha, so this pirate signal is coming from box XYZ, so we can shut down that consumer, or we can shut down that subscription, and that won't be, they won't be able to replicate that anymore. But pirates are not stupid. They don't use the latest technology to provide their sources. They're using sources that don't have this kind of protection, or, as increasingly the case in organized crime, they're doctoring the boxes or whatever source it is to make it anonymous, so you don't know where the source is coming from, or even if you do, you can't stop it because you don't have access to the actual ID of the piece of equipment that's being used. So, I mean, that is a sensible thing to do. This, if you license your content to somebody who has no protection in place, it's a free for all, and there's going to be a lot more piracy. But the really sophisticated pirates, they have their sources, and they're very well protected. So that's the first thing you need to do. The next thing is really the identification of where stuff is being pirated. And there are a lot of vendors out there who will help you identify where your content is being illegally streamed by. And once you've gathered that information, you can contact the intermediaries, the hosting providers who are, or the CDNs, whoever it is, who are in control of the IP addresses that are being used, and send them a takedown notice. The problem with that...
Would those could be automated, or is it literally somebody on the phone going, hi?
Well, that depends on the intermediary you're talking to. So, and this is really the core of the issue, I think, that we'll talk about, because the intermediaries are very different. There's a spectrum of intermediaries, some of which have very well established processes. So you, as you say, it can be quite automated. You send them a notice to a particular email address, they act upon it swiftly, content is taken down, happy days. But there are a lot of intermediaries who don't have sophisticated processes in place, who don't work weekends, for example, and who say that we'll get back to you on Monday once your sporting event is finished and the value's been extracted by the pirates. They don't say that, obviously, but that's the net effect of it. So the notice and takedown regime is completely useless in those cases. And it is perhaps unsurprising that the majority of pirate operators, they navigate towards these intermediaries who they know are not going to take stuff down in a timely fashion, which means that they can continue to operate their networks. And the nub of the issue is that legally, any intermediary who is sent a notice has to act expeditiously to respond to this notice. Now, how long is expeditious? So, as I say, if we look at the market, maybe out of all the intermediaries, I'd say probably 80% of them are good actors. So these are people that react quickly. Some of them even give us the tools to take down content on their networks because they trust us as rights owners. And we take on the legal risk, as it were, of taking things down which are legitimate. I have to say nobody has ever had a successful challenge to any of our notices in that way. But those intermediaries are obviously not the intermediaries of choice for pirates. So the pirates are working with the 20% of intermediaries that think that expeditious means tomorrow or after the weekend, and they haven't really got the staff to deal with all these notices anyway. Loads and loads of excuses, too expensive, too difficult, whatever. But we know from the other 80% that actually these things could be automated. You can get AI agents these days that will, if you give it an IP address, it'll go away and shut down the server. So, it's not that difficult. But legally, the safe harbor provision for intermediaries means that they're not liable for the content flowing through their networks until they are notified. But when they're notified, they only have to act expeditiously. So a big push that we have with policymakers is that you've got to clarify what expeditious means for live content. And I emphasize that because obviously if it's canned content and you're dealing with movies or you're dealing with music, well, tomorrow might be okay for expeditious. It might be. Obviously you want it taken down as quickly as possible, but because the value of sport is concentrated so heavily in that live window, and the value of highlights is 1 or 2% of the value of the live, we need a very specific mechanism for live content. And I'd say it's not just sport, any kind of live content, anything where that value is, whether it's concerts or live TV. I mean, they all have the same problem. But in the current regime, we cannot rely on some legal process that takes days, weeks, or however long. I should say, when I'm talking about these intermediaries, just so that everybody understands, we're not talking about the platforms themselves. We're talking about dedicated hosting providers who are providing the streaming servers that feed these platforms, whether it's websites, whether it's apps, whether it's IPTV. You'll find that a lot of these services, or a lot of these platforms, rely on the same sources to deliver their content because because we've done nothing for 18 years, the pirate ecosystem has become incredibly sophisticated. So you have wholesalers of piracy products, retailers of piracy products. If you want to set up in business as a pirate, you don't actually have to do anything yourself. You can go and rent 1 million streams from a wholesaler and get the infrastructure you need from an app provider and the payment from a payment provider, and away you go. I say it's great business. But
it's recruiting. You didn't know this was a recruiting session.
But what we're trying to do is really surgically remove that video content from the platform, because if you go after the platform, you're on a hiding to nothing, because you've got to prove that this is a completely fraudulent service, and the threshold is very high that 95% of it has to be illegal. In the days before IPTV, when website streaming was the norm, you used to see, we saw all these sites that were, during the week, general interest, like cookery websites or whatever, and then at 3 p.m. on a Saturday, flip, now they're showing live football for 2 hours, and after 2 hours they go back to cookery. So you can't shut them down because, well, you're nowhere near that threshold of 95%. But if you can remove the live stream, then at 3 o'clock it's just showing something. It's just showing a dark screen. So you don't need to go after the platform themselves. And I should say that, whereas in the beginning some of the social media platforms, YouTube and others, were a problem, today they're not the problem at all, because they have content ID, recognition. They're very cooperative. They have to be under the law, but things get taken down either before they've even started to be streamed or shortly thereafter, and they are a small percentage of the problem. I'd say less than 5%. But the biggest single segment now is IPTV, illegal IPTV, and I'm sure you've seen the dodgy boxes or the apps where you can access hundreds of channels from around the world for a yearly subscription of $100 or less. And this is now the real problem, not just for sport, but for broadcasters generally, that how can you possibly compete with a service like that aggregates so much content illegally in such high quality, and there's no way of stopping it. But again, if there was an obligation on the intermediaries to react, for example, within 15 minutes, whatever the number is, then you would have an enforcement remedy that would actually work. And we had a case in the Netherlands a few years ago, precisely along those lines, where a judge ruled that a hosting provider who was regularly hosting illegal football streams had to take them down within 30 minutes. That was a reasonable expectation of Expeditious, in his view. And he imposed very severe penalties running into the millions of euros if they did not comply with that in that time frame. And magically, it stopped overnight. But of course, this was just a specific ruling against one provider and one service. So it just started up on a different provider somewhere else. So, and this whole process took years, so within reason you can't go doing that with every single platform, which is why we've been arguing, particularly with the European Union for the last several years, that some kind of legal mechanism is required for live content to do that.
So there's you're kind of chugging away on trying to get the law on your side, or the enforcement of the law on your side.
Yeah.
But then also, do you have to really start getting creative about how you? Could there be a bounty on if I shut down a stream fast enough, do I get a little kickback from the rights owners or something? Can you start making it worth their while, or there interesting ways that you can start playing with the workflows and distribution methods we have to make things better?
You raise an interesting point. I don't think we're trying to incentivize criminals to do things differently.
Well, no, incentivize like the CDNs to be able to take things down faster. If you're a CDN that's going to that has we can guarantee your 30 minutes.
The real issue is that, and you touch on a very good point, which is, what is the incentive for an intermediary who is knowingly or unknowingly working with a clientele which is predominantly pirates to dump the pirates. So, we're already getting complaints from intermediaries who are getting millions of notices saying, oh, we can't cope with the millions of notices. But when you say, well, haven't you thought about why your competitors aren't getting any notices? And does that tell you something about their clientele versus your clientele? But this is all subjective. I mean, and we're not the first to have this problem. So in the film industry, I mean, you talked about your consumption of illegal DVDs. So talking to the film industry, in the days when the market for illegal DVDs from people capturing films in cinemas was rife, there was a huge market in buying the plastic cases to put them in to make the product look quite nice. And the film industry approached the manufacturers of these cases and said, you've got to stop supplying these cases to these people. It's killing us. But the manufacturers of the cases said, well, we sell 10 times as many cases to these people as we do to you. So how are you going to fill our market for us if we stop selling them to these people? So there does have to be a solution to finding legitimate sources of revenue. I'm not sure that that's our job, first and foremost, but to make it work, that may need to happen. But first and foremost, we need to have the obligation to take this stuff down in a much more precise way than expeditiously. Because as long as it's expeditious, people can argue, that they're not doing anything wrong.
Well, then, so there's the, I mean, you're talking about the demand. There's demand, and probably, I'm sure, probably a couple people in here know somebody who has a box that they bought down the street from some guy, and actually being as a user of pirated content, if I have a box or I'm accessing something illegally at home, it doesn't affect me. I mean, why, apart from the fact that I'm breaking the law, why should it bother me? And so I guess there's that. There's obviously education. So La Liga's just done a campaign that they're trying to educate people about that you're also exposing yourself potentially to cyber attack when you engage in dodgy platforms. But what is the engagement with the public and the fans like? And I know Sweden is kicking around this idea of now potentially fining users.
Yeah.
So is that something as well that you're looking at on the legal end?
Well, to be honest, it's not something we focused on until now. I mean, education, yes. But we deliberately haven't gone after the fan base because that is potentially, obviously, counterproductive. And it involves going after millions of people. I mean, just to give some perspective on my previous point, we think there are only 250 data centers in Europe that have the capacity to deliver piracy at scale. And if 80% of those are good actors, you're dealing with maybe a maximum of 50 hosting providers that you need to get to behave properly. That's a much more manageable problem if you have the obligation to react within a certain time than monitoring what millions of fans are doing. But you're right that there is this sense that this is a victimless crime, that me watching this stuff is absolutely fine. And it's not the same as me stealing a BMW and parking it in the driveway. But ultimately, it's theft. I mean, it's intellectual property theft as opposed to physical theft. But for us, it's very frustrating that if you look at the counterfeit goods market, I mean, counterfeit goods account for somewhere between 3 and 5% of world trade. Okay.
Wow.
And yet, there is a massive Interpol operation, stopping container ships, whatever, for something which is less than 5% of the market. And we're here at 50% of the market, and we're not doing anything apart from removing things expeditiously, which is useless. So there is there's a bit of catch up to be done. We're not asking for any new rights. We're just asking to be able to enforce the rights that we have in a timely fashion, which in the case of live sport is obviously very quickly. But in terms of the victimless crime aspect, I mean, if you subscribe to these services, you are at risk. I mean, the MPA did a study recently that showed that people who subscribed to these illegal services, using their credit cards, or they downloaded stuff onto their computer, they were 5 times more likely to be either the victims of identity theft or to have malicious malware on their device. So it's not risk-free, even for consumers. But as these things get more sophisticated, and I know there's been some stuff in the press recently in the UK about being able to identify, certainly Amazon Fire Sticks, which are being used illicitly, and you can, knock on the door of the consumer to do that. But it is in terms of a problem to be solved, it's a massive problem compared to trying to sort out 50 intermediaries that are causing 80% of the problem, which is why we think that's a much better place to start.
It does seem funny because I grew up in the U.S., so we didn't have this, but didn't you have the detector van would go past your house to sort of see if you'd paid your license, or wasn't there like the?
Yeah, but obviously
that just seems like a
the TV detector van.
Yeah.
I remember that. But
I only know that from watching old Monty Python episodes.
Absolutely, yeah. The cat detector van.
The cat detector van. Yeah, wasn't going to go there, but
yeah. Great sketch. But no, I mean, obviously, when you're dealing with analog signals, it was a bit easier to detect. But I think a combination of education and in the first instance is really the way to go. Whilst we get this, we deal with the supply side rather than the demand side.
Well, it's. I'm going to actually open it up to questions now, because this is designed to be a bit of a workshop format and allow you to take advantage of Mark's expertise. So, Kevin.
Seeing that the value of this piracy is such a huge.
Oh, and also, can we go ahead and use that? Hello, test. Yeah, here.
Seeing that the value of this piracy or the
One more time. Hold on there, Kevin.
Okay, I'll start again.
And action.
Okay. 1, 2. Seeing that the value of this piracy and the revenues that the rights holders and are losing, it strikes me that they are not investing a lot in technology in order to stop this. I saw at IBC this year a company called Illuvio, right? I don't know if you know them. I don't work for them, by the way, right? But they're using BitTorrent technology, like Pirate Bay used to use, and blockchain technology to be able to do that before the CDN phase. Why are the companies that are losing all this revenue not investing in technology to try and hit this? Or am I wrong? Are they?
Well, I think they are investing, in technology hugely, but it's always a leapfrog thing that you find a way to block things at a certain level, and somebody finds a way to get around it, and the pirates are always a step ahead, seemingly, in this space. I mean, technology certainly has a role, but it would be far simpler, really. Because we know that all this, the piracy in Europe is being facilitated from within Europe. It's not like it's coming from overseas, because proximity is essential to deliver quality pirate streams, or like any stream. But if we ought to be able to do something much more effectively to those actors who are facilitating it, rather than having to invest enormously in circumventing something which somebody will find another workaround for. So yes, technology has a role, but it has its limits, I think. I'm not familiar with this technology itself.
Blockchain is a constantly, because BitTorrent and blockchain is a technology that is constantly changing.
Yeah.
It's constantly reinventing its algorithms, its rights and everything like that. I was blown away by this, and I say, and it's the URC, I think the United Rugby Championship is using this technology right now, right? So it's possible to use this at the very early stage in order to do this. So all the people who own these rights should invest some more money in that type of technology, at least look at it, and then pay the producers of the programs a little bit more for their content.
Well, just following up on Kevin's point, I live in Dublin, and all of my friends have dodgy boxes, all of them, and I'm a Sky subscriber, and they just laugh at you.
Yeah.
And I cannot understand why Sky, with all their power, can't go after the service providers or fight back in some way, but the consumers are laughing at them.
Yeah, I agree.
And just to add, I suppose, to that, I get a sense from what you're saying, Mark, very interesting presentation, by the way, thank you. There's a reluctance within the EU to legislate. Where's the vested interest that would stop this legislation?
So, well, I think you heard the answer just now, actually, because the voters are all using dodgy boxes. They are, well, Ireland's part of the EU, but I mean, look, no, but joking aside, I mean, they know it's not a vote winner to go after this stuff.
So it's as simple as that?
Well, that's a big part of it.
So in some ways, it is like about.
It's all right, Neal.
Oh, thanks, Joe. My assistant, Joe Hoskin. I mean, is there also something about just putting enough friction in the system that it just makes it less worthwhile, rather than?
Yeah,
we've got to stop this. I mean, can you at least sort of put it like?
Well, this is it. I mean, we're not. We don't think that we're going to be able to solve the problem overnight by putting this obligation on intermediaries. But if it became, and we've had examples of this, there have been examples of this in other countries, that once your service becomes unreliable, so you want to watch the match and consistently you get it 30 minutes in and it's gone, then you're going to, it gets very frustrating. And so disrupting the market, we're under no illusions that we're going to convert everybody who's watching a dodgy box to pay a Sky subscription or whatever broadcaster it is. I mean, that's not going to happen. But, we could convert 20, 30, I don't know what the number is, percent of it. Some people will just not pay whatever it is. Let's face it, a lot of this is not about, I need to have access to content and I can't afford it. It's just I don't want to pay for it. And if, I'll watch something else if I have to pay for it, So there's no illusion that we're going to convert everybody. But it's just, it's just sucking so much money out of the ecosystem that means that, obviously it's pushing prices of legitimate content up, but it also means that there's less money to go around. And this is our argument to the policymakers, irrespective of whether you have sympathy with those who have dodgy boxes or you don't have any sympathy with footballers being paid less money, you ought to be conscious of the fact that fueling organised crime isn't really what you're here to do. And I mean, we don't know the exact numbers because these people don't file tax receipts, obviously. But, the anecdotal evidence would suggest that organised crime is embracing digital piracy in a way as a revenue stream which could be, third after drug trafficking and people trafficking. It could run into the hundreds of billions of dollars a year. And, and really, this is what we say to policymakers, really, you're prepared to preside over a state of affairs where digital piracy is fueling organised crime only because we couldn't decide what expeditious meant. Really?
But also, that's money? I'm sorry, I'll get to your question. But that's also that money that is potentially 100 billion pounds or euros sitting there that could that could be in the economy, or you could.
Well, yeah, and also, I mean, you know, it could be in the sports ecosystem. It could be alleviating the necessity for governments to invest in grassroots sport because there's more money flowing through the pyramid of.
Or could make sports. Could it make, God forbid, sports rights or sports viewing free for more people?
Well, cheaper, quite possibly.
Cheaper. Okay.
I don't think free is. I mean, last time I checked, it's not free on the BBC either.
Okay.
But, you know,
free at the point of service.
Yeah, I mean, you know, tax revenues as well. I mean, governments ought to have a vested interest in getting their share of the legitimate revenue, and yet, you know, we're arguing about things, particularly in the European Union at the moment, about network fees, i.e., putting additional costs onto legitimate streaming operators who are using lots of bandwidth, or whose services use up lots of bandwidth, should I say. So this would be a double whammy. So the pirates get away with no extra costs, and the legitimate providers would get an additional tax on what they're doing. And meantime, a quarter of the bandwidth being used for video streaming worldwide is being used for pirated streams. So if you think there's a lack of bandwidth, which some people do, but I don't think is true, you could start by taking out the illegal streaming market, and you get 25% of the bandwidth back straight away.
Was that good?
Sure. You kind of already spoke about the dodgy DVDs from the past, Pirate Bay from earlier. When the streamers came on board, maybe the film industry didn't have as much of a piracy problem anymore. It seems to be all have gone to the sports, let's say footage and video and stuff like that, because I suppose the streamers of the films and stuff made it easier to get that content. Is actually maybe the solution here is to make the sports rights content easier to get at. I know you just spoke about being free, but
so it's a very interesting question. I mean, I remember doing an interview with the Financial Times 20 years ago when it was put to me that, you know, sports was going to go the same way as the music industry, that iTunes would you know, there would be an iTunes equivalent, if you like, for sport. I think obviously that hasn't happened, but and the reason it hasn't happened is because we're talking about live content as opposed to canned content. And I mean, there is no, let's face it, there's no exclusivity in the music industry because lots of different services have the same music. So, you know, there's lots of music to go around. Film, slightly different, but ultimately there are lots of services where you can access film. And both film and music have a long tail of value. Sport does not have a long tail of value. Its value is almost over as soon as the sporting event has finished, which makes it so attractive to broadcasters because it's the ultimate appointment to view. If you want to get customers' attention and have them engaged with your advertisers or buying your mobile phones or your broadband, whatever it is that you're selling to this consumer base, it is the ultimate product, and therefore exclusivity is absolutely key. And it's those things that are driving the market and therefore making it, I think, extremely unlikely that you get to a Netflix of sport type scenario. Because I mean, obviously people like Netflix are obviously investing in sport, but on an exclusive basis. Whereas, you know, there's still different ways to get film or music, even if there is a predominantly or a major player providing it. So I think that's the reason. You know, the thing with music was that iTunes made it much more granular. I mean, obviously the music industry had a fantastic model where you had to buy the whole album, and Steve Jobs made it 99 cents a track and everybody just bought the track that they wanted. Don't see that kind of equivalent in sport.
We're officially supposed to be done at 1:30, but this can kind of go on as long as we want to. Are there any other questions?
So just a quick follow-up. So do you think, so you mentioned like Spotify, Apple Music, right? But there is potential for a solution. Let's say, for example, F1, right? Streaming service is a little expensive if you pay for it. But do you think in 10 years, 5 years, F1 could say, you know, we're going to keep all the rights ourselves. We're not going to sell rights to anybody. Have our own app. You come into it, and we're going to monetize it ourselves completely. Maybe even be free with advertising or something like that. But you know, so F1 can say, we're going to reach 3 billion people around the world without having to make a rights deal. And then maybe piracy, and offer a free service that's maybe ad supported, and maybe piracy won't go away. Because at the core, it's number one, fans find it too expensive. Number two, kids don't think it's piracy. They just love to steal it. So is that a possible solution, something crazy like that? Where the rights holders say, we're the league, EPL, we're going to control it ourselves. No more Sky, no more...
Well, I mean, you saw in the presentation earlier today how the French league has moved to a direct-to-consumer model, and they're making 150 million a year out of that. Previously, when they sold the rights to Canal Plus, it was in excess of $1 billion.
Right.
Okay, because there isn't a one-to-one relationship between the value of the rights and what the broadcaster can do with it. Because, as I said earlier, you know, the broadcaster has multiple income streams based on your content, selling its own services, whether it's mobile phones, broadband, selling stuff to its own advertisers, getting sponsorship, etc. When you have your own service direct to consumer, unless as a rights owner you want to diversify into all these different things, your limit, you know, the one-to-one limitation means a much, much lower value. Plus, you know, you're on your own, whereas if you're on a broadcaster, you're aggregated with lots of things. People aren't buying a subscription just for one thing in the main, they're buying it for lots of things, so that cost is spread over a big offer. So, you know, it's aggregation. I mean, if you look at the history of media, aggregation ultimately always wins out. Right. Doesn't matter what the medium is.
But the complication becomes, like in the U.S., for example, the rights are so diverse. Now let's take NFL.
Yeah.
So diverse that what fans will do is they'll say, I'll pay for Netflix, I'll pay for Paramount, oh, but it's on Peacock, this game, I'm going to steal Peacock just for today, you know, and pirate it. So that's because there's a little bit of fatigue of having, where do you find your games? They're spread over so many services. So...
Yeah, I get that. I mean, it's ironic, you know, because the European legislators are saying to us, yes, exactly the same argument. The thing is that, you know, people have to get multiple subscriptions to watch all the matches. And yet, it's those legislators, those same legislators who said, no single buyer rule. We're not having concentration of power with one broadcaster. So the reason it's separated over so many providers is because they legislated in competition law to make it that way, and now it's our fault. So yeah, I mean, we would love to have one customer. We would love to have one global customer that we had to deal with. I think most rights say, as long as the price is right, that makes life a lot easier. But you know, there's just too many things in the way. But again, you know, for the pirates, of course, obviously not subject to competition law, it's fantastic. You get, I say, 4,000 channels under one roof for $100 a year. Happy days, you know. So you can't compete with free at the end of the day. So
amazing. Any other questions? We're all good. I think that's it. Mark, thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, everybody.